Subscribe to Storylab. Now let's begin. Glenn Frazier had learned to read silence the way most men read newspapers. 22 years in special operations had taught him that the loudest screams often came from the spaces between words, in the pauses where truth bled through lies like ink through wet paper. But nothing had prepared him for the silence that followed his daughter's voice cutting through the static of a black site interrogation room 4,000 miles from home. The man across the table from Glenn was named Dmitry Volkov, a name that appeared on no official records, but whispered through the corridors of 3 intelligence agencies. Volkov had been selling weapons-grade plutonium to the highest bidder for the better part of a decade. He was also missing 2 fingernails, courtesy of the last 6 hours, and still hadn't given up his contact in Prague. Glenn's earpiece crackled. Not the tactical frequency he used for operations, but the civilian Bluetooth paired to his phone. The sound was faint, distant, filtered through the small speaker of the smartwatch he'd given Leslie for her 12th birthday 3 months ago. The one she'd been so excited about, the one that could track her runs, monitor her heart rate, and, though he hadn't emphasized this feature, record audio when activated. The voice that came through wasn't Leslie's. It was deeper, male, slurred at the edges in a way Glenn recognized from hundreds of threat assessments. Alcohol, maybe pills. The kind of pharmaceutical courage that made weak men do terrible things. Come on, sweetheart. Your mom's not home. It's just us. Glenn's hand, which had been reaching for the pliers on the metal tray beside him, stopped. Volkov noticed. The Russian's eyes, one swollen nearly shut, tracked the change in Glenn's posture with the survival instinct of prey, recognizing a predator's shift in attention. "Uncle Chad, please." Leslie's voice was small, terrified. Everything in Glenn went cold and sharp. Uncle Chad, Heather's brother. Chad Eaton, who'd moved back to Virginia 6 months ago after getting his life together in Florida. Who'd been staying in their guest room while he looked for work. Who'd been at Sunday dinners. Who'd driven Leslie to soccer practice twice when Heather was sick. Who'd smiled and joked and played the role of reformed family man with such practiced ease that Glenn had almost believed it. Almost. "Your soldier daddy can't protect you from here," Chad whispered, and Glenn heard the sound of a door closing. Leslie's bedroom door. He knew the creak of those hinges. "He's off playing hero somewhere while Glenn was moving before conscious thought caught up with muscle memory. He crossed to the door of the interrogation room in 3 strides, his hand already pulling his tactical phone from his thigh pocket. The guard outside, a local contractor named Rashid, took one look at Glenn's face and stepped back. "Sir, the prisoner is staying right where he is," Glenn said, his voice flat, emotionless. The kind of calm that preceded violence. "Lock it. Don't open it for anyone but Marshall or Carmen. Understand?" Rashid nodded, already reaching for his keys. Glenn walked down the concrete corridor of the black site, an abandoned Soviet-era bunker outside Tbilisi that officially didn't exist. His team had been here for 3 days, working Volkov over in shifts, extracting names and bank accounts with the methodical precision of surgeons. It was important work. The kind that saved thousands of lives by preventing dirty bombs in subway stations, radiological attacks on water supplies. None of it mattered anymore. He emerged into the operations room, where Marshall Payne sat monitoring feeds, a massive black man with graying temples and hands that could palm a basketball. Marshall had been with Glenn for 15 years, through Fallujah and Kandahar, and a dozen places that never made the news. He looked up as Glenn entered, took in his commander's expression, and immediately pulled off his headset. "Talk to me," Marshall said. Glenn didn't waste words. He pulled up the audio file already recording on his phone. The watch sent everything to a cloud backup, a feature he'd insisted on specifically because he didn't trust the world to keep his daughter safe, and played the last 30 seconds. Marshall's jaw tightened. He'd met Leslie a dozen times, had taught her to throw a proper punch last Christmas after she'd asked him about self-defense. When? Happening now. Heather's at her book club until 9. Leslie's alone with him. Flight time to Virginia? 14 hours minimum. Commercial 16. We'd never make it. Marshall stood, already calculating. Police. And say what? That I'm illegally monitoring my daughter through her watch while conducting an unauthorized interrogation in a country where we're not supposed to be. Glenn's voice was still flat, but something dark moved beneath the surface. Even if they believed me, even if they moved fast, we're talking local PD response time of 8 to 12 minutes to our neighborhood. Interview time with Leslie, collection of evidence, transport to hospital for rape kit. He stopped. Took a breath that sounded like grinding glass. He'd be out on bail before we landed. Your wife is Chad's sister, has been making excuses for him since they were kids. She doesn't know what I know. Marshall waited. Glenn had mentioned his brother-in-law exactly once in the past 6 months. A brief comment that Chad had a record, but seemed to be trying to turn things around. Marshall had been in the game long enough to know that seemed was doing heavy lifting in that sentence. I did a deep background when he asked to stay with us. Glenn continued. The official record shows possession charges in Florida, public intoxication, trespassing, sealed juvenile file, and the unofficial record, 2 accusations of assault on minors. 1 in Tampa, 1 in Orlando. Different last names, 3 years apart. Both dropped when families accepted settlements from a law firm Chad can't afford. Both girls were 12 to 14. Glenn's voice could have etched glass. The juvenile file was sealed because he was 17 when he assaulted a neighbor's daughter. Heather doesn't know any of this. Her parents kept it from her, paid it away, sent him to military school to straighten him out. Marshall processed this. So you've been watching him. Every minute he's been around my daughter. Cameras in common areas, activity logs on his phone when he's on our Wi-Fi, location tracking on his car. He's been careful. Until tonight. Until he thought I was far enough away not to matter. From Glenn's phone, they could still hear the audio feed. Leslie was crying now, pleading. The sounds of struggle. Glenn reached for his tactical phone, the encrypted satellite line that connected directly to his team. Who do we have stateside? He asked Marshall. Tommy's on leave in D.C. 45 minutes from your place. Maybe 30 if he speeds. Call him. Tell him I need him at my house. Armed. Now. Glenn. Marshall's voice held a warning note. We're talking about your brother-in-law. Heather's family. You need to think. I'm done thinking. Glenn was already pulling up another screen, accessing the security cameras he'd installed throughout his house. The feed from Leslie's room had been disabled. Chad must have found the camera, the only one Leslie knew about, the decoy Glenn had placed in plain sight specifically because he wanted to see what people would do when they thought they weren't being watched. But there were others. Hidden in smoke detectors, in a hallway vent, in the bookshelf opposite Leslie's door. Glenn cycled through them until he found the angle he needed. The door was closed, but he could see Chad's jacket hanging on the hallway hook. Could see his shoes by the door. On the audio feed, Leslie screamed. Something in Glenn shattered. Not broke. That implied weakness, fragility. What happened was more fundamental, a chemical change at the molecular level. The part of him that believed in laws and procedures and the thin veneer of civilization combusted and left behind something older, something that existed before courts and constitutions. A father protecting his child. Marshall, he said quietly, get Carmen on the line. Tell her I need a plane. Military transport, fastest thing we've got, cleared through all channels. That's going to require explanations. Then I'll explain. But that plane will be wheels up in 30 minutes, or I'm calling in every favor I'm owed from the past 22 years. I don't care if they send the Secretary of Defense's personal jet. I'm getting home. Marshall hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, weighing loyalty against protocol. Then he reached for his phone. I'm coming with you. You need it here. Volkov. Can wait. Or can die. I don't give a damn which. Marshall was already packing his gear, the efficient movements of a man who'd evacuated hot zones in the middle of firefights. Your family is my family. You don't do this alone. Glenn wanted to argue. Knew he should argue. But the sound of his daughter crying was still playing through his earpiece, and the cold rage in his chest had crystallized into something sharp and purposeful. He made 3 more calls in rapid succession. First, to Tommy Zimmerman, who answered on the first ring. Glenn didn't explain, just gave him the address and 3 words, protect my daughter. Tommy, who'd served under Glenn in 3 combat zones and understood the tone of a command that superseded all other considerations, said only, ETA 28 minutes. Rules of engagement. Keep him alive. Everything else is optional. Second, to his handler, Carmen Russell, a woman who'd been running covert operations since before Glenn graduated high school. She was the one who'd recruited him, who'd shaped him from Marine Force recon operator into something more specialized, more dangerous. I need a plane, Glenn said without preamble. Glenn, you're in the middle of. I need a plane, Carmen. My daughter is being assaulted as we speak. I'm either on military transport in 30 minutes, or I'm hijacking the first civilian aircraft I find. Your choice. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Then, give me 20 minutes. There's AC 130 at Tbilisi International running supplies to Ramstein. I'll reroute it. You'll have to jump to a transatlantic from Germany. How long? 12 hours total if we push it. Maybe 10 if I can get you on a fighter with refueling. Do it. The third call was to Heather. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright with the slightly elevated volume of someone trying to be heard over background noise. Hey, honey, I'm at France. We just opened the 2nd bottle of wine, and we're debating whether Elizabeth Pennington's book club pick was secretly about her divorce. Where's Chad? Glenn asked. Heather paused. What? Your brother. Where's he right now? He said he was going to stay in tonight, watch a game. Why? Is everything okay? Glenn looked at Marshall, who'd moved to the equipment locker and was methodically loading weapons into a deployment bag. On the phone, Leslie had gone quiet, not silent. Glenn could still hear her breathing, fast and shallow, but the sounds of struggle had stopped. He didn't know if that was better or worse. I need you to come home, Glenn said, keeping his voice level. Right now. Glenn, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Just come home, Heather. Don't call ahead. Don't text Chad. Just get in your car and drive. Is Leslie? I'll explain when you get there. How far away are you? 20 minutes. Glenn, tell me. 20 minutes. Drive safe. He ended the call. Marshall had finished packing. Exfil vehicle. Rashi can take us to the airport. Carmen's clearing us through. Glenn took one last look at the interrogation room monitor. Volkov was still chained to the chair, head down, probably wondering if he'd been abandoned. Let him wonder. Let him think he'd been forgotten in this concrete hole in the ground. Glenn would deal with him later, or someone else would, or the Russian would die of dehydration in 3 days. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was 4,000 miles away, in a house with yellow shutters and a tire swing in the backyard, where a 12-year-old girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair was learning that the world was not safe, that monsters were real, that they wore familiar faces and called themselves family. Glenn checked his watch. Tommy would be there in 26 minutes. Heather in 18. The plane in. He glanced at his tactical phone. 16 if Carmen worked her usual magic. On the audio feed, he heard Chad's voice again. See? That wasn't so bad. We can keep this our little secret. You don't want to upset your mom, do you? Glenn disconnected the earpiece. He'd heard enough. He'd heard everything he needed to hear. Let's move, he said to Marshall. They were out of the bunker in 4 minutes, in Rashid's Land Cruiser in 6, and speeding toward Tbilisi International in 8. Glenn spent the drive making more calls, activating networks, pulling strings. He contacted a judge advocate he'd saved in Ramadi who owed him a lifetime of favors. He reached out to an FBI agent who'd once asked for Glenn's help with a trafficking case and promised anything in return. He called a civilian lawyer in D.C. who specialized in the kind of cases that never went to trial because the evidence was so overwhelming that defendants took plea deals just to avoid facing a jury. He was building something, a structure made of laws and witnesses and ironclad testimony that would close around Chad Eden like a bear trap. But that was just the foundation, the legal framework that would satisfy society's need for procedure. What Glenn was really building was a cage, and he was going to make sure that Chad Eaton stayed in it for the rest of his life, in conditions that would make him beg for the mercy of a quick death. The C-130 was waiting on the tarmac when they arrived, engines already running. Carmen had somehow procured clearance through Georgian Air Traffic Control, NATO airspace, and the German airbase at Ramstein. Glenn didn't ask how. He just boarded the aircraft with Marshall and strapped in for the first leg of the flight. As the plane lifted off, banking west over the Black Sea, Glenn pulled out his tablet and accessed the cloud backup of Leslie's watch. The recording had stopped 23 minutes ago. He forced himself to listen to the entire thing, from beginning to end. Every word, every sound, every moment of his daughter's terror. When it finished, Marshall said quietly, "You don't have to do that to yourself." "Yes," Glenn said, "I do." Because he needed to remember, needed to burn it into his memory with perfect clarity so that when the time came, when he was face to face with Chad Eaton, when the rage tried to make him sloppy or quick or merciful, he would remember his daughter's voice and stay focused on the plan. And the plan was already taking shape, piece by piece, a complex machine designed for a single purpose: to make Chad Eaton suffer in ways that would make Volkov's missing fingernails look like a paper cut. Marshall pulled out his own tablet, accessing a secure database. "I'm pulling everything we've got on Chad Eaton. Want to see what else he's been hiding." Glenn nodded. "Everything. I want to know every person he's hurt, every crime he's committed, every lie he's told. I want to know who covered for him, who enabled him, who looked the other way. All of it. Because Glenn Frazier had spent 2 decades learning how to unmake men, how to find their pressure points, their weaknesses, the things that kept them awake at night. He knew how to turn their allies against them, how to make their money disappear, how to ensure that every door they tried to open slammed shut in their faces. And now he was going to use all of that knowledge, all of that expertise, all of that carefully honed skill at destroying human beings on the man who'd hurt his daughter. Chad Eaton had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out. Tommy Zimmerman arrived at the Frazier house at exactly 11:47 p.m., parking his truck 3 houses down and approaching on foot. He was a lean man with sharp features and the kind of stillness that came from spending too many hours in sniper hides, waiting for the perfect shot. His service weapon was in a shoulder holster under his jacket, and he had a backup piece at his ankle. Glenn's instructions had been clear: keep Chad alive. Everything else was optional. The house was a 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people installed basketball hoops in driveways and organized block parties. Tommy had been here for a barbecue last summer, had watched Glenn flip burgers while Leslie practiced cartwheels on the lawn, and Heather laughed at something her mother said. It seemed so normal, so safe. He moved to the side gate, vaulted it silently, and approached the back door. Glenn had given him the security code. The house was wired with enough surveillance tech to make the NSA jealous, all of it hidden, all of it feeding to Glenn's private servers. Tommy let himself in through the kitchen and stood in the darkness, listening. The house was too quiet. No TV sounds, no voices. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of old house settling. He moved through the first floor methodically, clearing rooms with the muscle memory of 1,000 building entries. Living room, empty. Dining room, empty. Study, empty. He was about to check upstairs when he heard the shower running on the 2nd floor. Tommy took the stairs slowly, placing his feet at the edges where boards were less likely to creak. The bathroom door was closed, steam seeping underneath. The shower was running, but it was the door directly across the hall that drew his attention. Leslie's room. Door closed. A ribbon of light beneath it. Tommy had seen Leslie's room before. It was full of soccer trophies and boy band posters and books stacked on every surface. Smart kid. Funny. She'd asked him once if he'd ever had to shoot anyone, and when he'd given her a sanitized version of the truth, she nodded seriously and said, "That must be hard, having to make those choices." 12 years old, and she understood moral complexity better than most adults. Tommy put his hand on the doorknob, turned it slowly. Locked from the inside. He knocked. "Leslie? It's Tommy. Your dad sent me. You can open the door, sweetheart. You're safe now." For a long moment, nothing. Then a small voice. "How do I know you're really Tommy?" "Last Christmas, your dad's party. You asked me to teach you self-defense. I showed you how to throw a palm strike, and you hit me so hard I actually saw stars." Your dad laughed for 5 minutes straight. Another pause. Then the sound of the lock disengaging. The door opened 6 inches. Leslie stood there in an oversized sweatshirt and pajama pants, her dark hair tangled, her face blotchy from crying. But her eyes, her father's eyes, sharp and gray and assessing, were dry now. "Where's my dad?" she asked. "On his way. He'll be here in about 10 hours. Tommy kept his voice gentle. "Can I come in?" Leslie stepped back, letting him enter. Tommy did a quick visual sweep of the room. Bed unmade, clothes on the floor, a desk with a laptop open to some kind of homework assignment. And on the nightstand, her smartwatch, the small red recording light still blinking. She'd left it on purpose, making sure her father heard everything. "Smart kid. Did he hurt you?" Tommy asked carefully. Leslie's jaw tightened. "He tried. I bit him hard enough to draw blood. Then I kicked him and locked myself in here." Tommy felt something loosen in his chest. "Good. That's exactly right. You fought back." "I wanted to do more," Leslie said, and there was something cold in her voice, something that reminded Tommy uncomfortably of Glenn. "I wanted to hurt him worse. But I was scared. Being scared is smart. It keeps you alive." Tommy listened to the shower, still running. "Where is he now?" "Bathroom. He's been in there for 20 minutes. I heard him throwing up. Guilt, maybe. Or fear." Chad Eaton had to know that the watch was recording, had to know that Glenn would find out eventually. But maybe he'd thought he had time. Maybe he thought he could spin a story, convince Heather it was a misunderstanding, make Leslie out to be confused or lying. The shower shut off. Tommy heard the bathroom door open, heard footsteps in the hallway. "Stay here," Tommy told Leslie. "Lock the door behind me." He stepped out into the hallway just as Chad emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, hair wet. Chad was a soft-looking man in his late 30s, with the kind of bloated face that came from too much drinking and too many excuses. He had a bite mark on his right hand, angry and red, still bleeding slightly. Chad froze when he saw Tommy. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Tommy smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "I'm the babysitter. Heather didn't say anything about. Heather didn't send me. Glenn did." All the color drained from Chad's face. "Glenn's in Georgia. He was in Georgia. Now he's on a plane. And he wanted to make sure you didn't go anywhere before he got home." Chad took a step backward. "I don't know what Leslie told you, but she's confused. I was just checking on her, making sure she was okay, and she freaked out for no reason." "Save it," Tommy interrupted. "I heard the recording. We all heard it. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to get dressed. Then you're going to sit downstairs and wait. You're not going to leave. You're not going to make any phone calls. You're not going to do anything except exist quietly until Glenn gets here. Understood? You can't keep me here. I haven't done anything wrong. The recording says different. So does the bite mark on your hand." Tommy let his jacket fall open enough to show the holster. "And I have permission to use whatever force is necessary to keep you here. So test me. Please." Chad looked at the gun, then at Tommy's face, and whatever he saw there made the decision for him. He edged past Tommy, keeping as much distance as possible, and hurried to the guest room. Tommy knocked on Leslie's door. "It's me again." She opened it immediately. "Is he getting dressed? Then he's going downstairs to wait for your dad." Tommy hesitated. "Your mom's going to be home soon. You want to tell her what happened? Or that you want me to?" Leslie thought about it. "I'll tell her. She needs to hear it from me." 20 minutes later, Heather's car pulled into the driveway. Tommy heard the garage door open, heard her enter through the kitchen. She called out for Chad, then for Leslie, her voice holding an edge of worry. Leslie came out of her room and went downstairs. Tommy followed, staying in the background, but close enough to intervene if needed. Heather was standing in the living room, car keys still in her hand, when she saw Chad sitting on the couch. Then she saw Tommy. Then she saw Leslie's face. "What's going on?" Heather asked. "Where's Glenn? He called me, told me to come home, and then he wouldn't answer his phone." "Mom," Leslie said quietly, "Uncle Chad tried to rape me." The keys fell from Heather's hand, hit the hardwood floor with a metallic clatter. "What?" "He came into my room. He said Dad couldn't protect me. He tried." Leslie's voice cracked. "But I fought. I bit him and I locked my door." Heather looked at her brother. Chad was staring at the floor, his hands clasped between his knees. The bite mark was clearly visible. "Chad." Heather's voice was very small. "Tell me she's wrong. Tell me she misunderstood something." Chad looked up. and Tommy saw the exact moment he made his decision. The moment he chose the lie. "I was checking on her," Chad said. "I heard a noise, thought maybe she fell or something. I knocked. She said come in, and when I opened the door she screamed. I don't know why. I think maybe she was having a nightmare. Got confused." "Liar." Leslie's voice cracked like a whip. "I have proof. Dad gave me a watch that records everything. He heard all of it. He heard exactly what you said, what you did." Chad's face went gray. "You're lying. You're just trying to get me in trouble because you're angry I told you to clean your room." "Stop." Heather's voice was barely audible. She was looking at her daughter, at the truth written plainly on Leslie's face, at the bite mark on her brother's hand. "Just stop talking." "Heather, come on. You know me. You know I would never." "I don't know you," Heather said, and something in her voice made Tommy tense. "I thought I did. I thought you changed. But I don't know you at all." She turned to Tommy. "Where's Glenn?" "In the air. He'll be here around 10 a.m. And you are?" "Tommy Zimmerman. I work with Glenn. He called me. Asked me to make sure Leslie was safe and that Chad stayed here until he arrived." Heather nodded slowly, processing. Then she looked at her brother. "You need to leave." "What?" "Heather, no, listen. Get out of my house. Right now. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care. A hotel. Your car. Hell. Anywhere but here." Heather's voice was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "Get out before I call the police myself." Tommy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, Glenn was pretty clear that Chad should stay here." Heather turned to him, and Tommy saw the rage beneath her tears. "Then you keep him here. Restrain him, tie him to a chair, I don't care. But get him away from my daughter." Tommy looked at Chad. "You heard her. We're going to wait in the garage. Move." Chad stood slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "This is insane. You can't just." Tommy crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped Chad's upper arm hard enough to make him gasp. "Garage. Now, or I drag you." He propelled Chad through the kitchen and into the garage, a space with 2 car bays and tools mounted on pegboards. Tommy found a folding chair, snapped it open, and pointed. "Sit." Chad sat. He looked smaller now, hunched in on himself. "You're making a mistake. When Glenn gets here, when he hears my side." "I've known Glenn for 8 years, Tommy said conversationally. "Serve under him in some of the worst places on earth. Watch him make decisions that saved hundreds of lives. And I've never, not once, seen him lose control." He paused. "But I've also never seen anyone hurt his family. So when he gets here, you better hope your side of the story is really, really convincing. Because the Glenn Frazier I know doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. And he's very, very good at making problems disappear." Chad swallowed hard. "He wouldn't. He's military. He has rules. He's military intelligence. Black Ops. The kind of operations that don't show up in official records." Tommy pulled out a zip tie from his pocket. He'd come prepared and secured Chad's wrists to the chair arms. Not tight enough to cut circulation, but firm enough that escape was impossible. The kind where rules are optional and witnesses are rare. "You're trying to scare me." "Yes," Tommy agreed. "Is it working?" Chad didn't answer, but the way his hands were shaking said enough. Tommy pulled out his phone and sent a message to Glenn. "Package secured. Family safe. Waiting for your arrival." The response came back immediately. "Thank you. When I land, take Leslie and Heather somewhere else. A hotel, a friend house. Anywhere but here." Tommy frowned at the screen. "Why?" "Because what I'm going to do to Chad Eaton isn't something they need to witness." Tommy looked at the man zip-tied to the chair, this soft, predatory thing that had tried to hurt a 12-year-old girl, and felt no sympathy whatsoever. "Understood," he typed back. "See you in 10 hours. Glenn's flight landed at Dulles International Airport at 9:47 a.m. Carmen had arranged for a car to meet them on the tarmac, bypassing customs and security through the kind of channels that only existed for people who operated in the shadows. Marshall drove while Glenn sat in the passenger seat, checking and rechecking the information that had accumulated during the flight. The FBI agent he contacted had expedited a background check that would normally take weeks. It painted a picture that made Glenn's jaw ache from how hard he was clenching it. Chad Eaton had 7 assault accusations spread across 4 states, dating back to when he was 15. Only one had resulted in charges, and those had been dropped when the victim's family relocated suddenly and refused to testify. Glenn had made a call to a private investigator who owed him a favor, and within 4 hours had confirmation. The family had received a $50,000 payment from a trust fund controlled by Chad's father, Harold Eaton. Harold was dead now, heart attack 2 years ago, but his widow, Chad's mother Ramona, was still alive and living in a retirement community in Arizona. Glenn had her number. He'd be calling her soon. The other accusations followed a pattern. Girls between 11 and 14. Situations where Chad had access and authority. A babysitting job in Tampa. A volunteer position at a youth center in Jacksonville. A coaching stint at a summer camp in Orlando. Each time, there'd been an accusation. Each time, money or pressure had made it go away. And each time, Chad had moved to a new city, changed his approach slightly, gotten more careful. Until he'd gotten comfortable, gotten arrogant, gotten sloppy enough to assault a girl in a house full of surveillance equipment, watched over by a father who made a living finding people who didn't want to be found. Marshall pulled into the driveway at 10:03 a.m. Tommy's truck was still parked down the street. The house looked normal, peaceful, just another suburban home on a quiet Thursday morning. Glenn got out of the car and walked to the front door. It opened before he could knock. Tommy stood there, his expression grim. "They're not here," he said immediately. "I took them to a hotel near Dulles, like you asked." Leslie shaken, but okay. "Heather's." He paused. "Processing." "In Chad. Garage. Secured." "Hasn't said much." Glenn nodded. "Thank you. You should leave now." Glenn. "Tommy, I appreciate everything you've done. But what happens next, you don't want to be part of it." Tommy looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. Security footage from last night. All of it. Already backed up to 3 separate servers, including one offshore. Time-stamped, authenticated, legally admissible. Chad's done, even if he somehow gets a lawyer who could tie the system in knots. This is ironclad. Glenn took the USB drive. "You're a good friend. So are you. Which is why I'm telling you. Think about what you're going to do. Think about whether you can come back from it." "I've already thought about it," Glenn said quietly. "For the entire flight. And the answer is yes. I can come back from it. Because the alternative is letting him walk around free, letting him smile and lie and move to another city and find another child to hurt. And I can't live with that." Tommy nodded slowly. Then he clapped Glenn on the shoulder and walked to his truck. Marshall came up behind Glenn. "Want me to stay?" "No. This is something I need to do alone." "Glenn, I'm not going to kill him." "Marshall, I'm not that far gone." Glenn looked at his team member, his friend. "But I'm going to make sure he pays for what he did. And the kind of payment I have in mind, you don't want documented anywhere near you." Marshall studied his face. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black case. "If you change your mind about that first part, these are untraceable. No serial numbers, no ballistics on file. Dump it in the Potomac after, and it's gone." Glenn took the case, felt the weight of the weapon inside. He wouldn't use it. Probably wouldn't. But having the option, "Thanks. Call me when it's done. I'll help with cleanup if you need it." Marshall returned to the car and drove away. Glenn stood on his front porch for a moment, breathing in the spring air, listening to birds singing in the trees. Everything was so normal, so mundane. The world kept turning, indifferent to the violence that lurked beneath its surface. He went inside. The house smelled like coffee and the lavender air freshener Heather liked. Glenn walked through rooms he'd walked through 1,000 times, seeing them differently now. The couch where Chad had sat and lied. The stairs Leslie had climbed to escape to her room. The bathroom where Chad had tried to wash away his guilt. Glenn continued to the garage. Chad was exactly where Tommy had left him, zip-tied to a folding chair, looking rumpled and exhausted. His eyes widened when Glenn entered, and he tried to stand, forgetting about the restraints. "Glenn, thank God. Listen, there's been a huge misunderstanding." Glenn crossed the garage and backhanded Chad across the face with enough force to snap his head sideways. Chad's chair tipped, crashed to the concrete floor. Glenn righted it casually, then pulled over a work stool and sat down, making himself comfortable. Let me be very clear about something, Glenn said, his voice calm and conversational. I heard the entire thing. Every word. Every sound. I have it recorded, backed up to multiple servers, ready to be delivered to law enforcement. So when you open your mouth, the only thing that should come out is the truth. Do you understand? Chad's lip was bleeding. He nodded frantically. Good. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to answer them honestly. If I think you're lying, I'm going to hurt you. Not kill you. I promised my team I wouldn't do that, and I keep my promises. But I know 17 different ways to cause excruciating pain without leaving permanent damage, and I'm willing to demonstrate all of them. Glenn, please. How many? Glenn asked. How many children have you assaulted? Chad's mouth opened and closed. I don't. Glenn stood, grabbed Chad's right hand, the one with the bite mark, and squeezed. Chad screamed. How many? I don't know. I don't keep count. More than 10. A hesitation. Then a nod. More than 20. Another nod. Glenn felt the cold rage crystallize into something sharp and purposeful. And my daughter was going to be one more. Just another victim in a long line of children you hurt. I'm sick, Chad gasped out. I need help. I know that. I'll get therapy. I'll go to a program. You've had chances for help. Multiple chances. Your parents paid for therapy when you were 17. Paid for rehab programs, halfway houses, all of it. And every time, you convinced someone you were better, that you'd changed, that it was safe to let you around children again. Glenn released Chad's hand. So no, you don't get another chance. You don't get to smile and lie and worm your way into another family. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure you never hurt another child. Ever. Glenn pulled out his phone. First, I'm going to call the police. Give them the recording, the evidence, everything they need. You're going to be arrested, charged, prosecuted. With your record and the evidence I have, you're looking at 20 to 30 years minimum. Chad's face crumpled with relief. Okay, I'll cooperate. I'll plead guilty, but that's just the legal consequence. That's what society demands. What I demand is something more. Glenn scrolled through his contacts. You see, during my flight, I did some research. Found the names of every child you've hurt. Contacted their families. And I've given them all something they've needed for years. The truth. Documented proof of what you did. Several of them are filing lawsuits. Civil cases. They're going to take every penny you have, every asset, every inheritance. You'll leave prison with nothing but the clothes on your back. I don't have any money, but your mother does. And I've already contacted her attorney. Explained that if she tries to help you financially in any way, if she tries to post bail or hire lawyers or pay your commissary account, I'll make sure every news outlet in Arizona knows exactly what her son is and what she enabled. Her retirement community will know. Her church will know. Every friend she's made in the last 20 years will know that she spent decades covering for a child predator. Chad was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. You can't do that to her. She's an old woman. She protected you, paid off your victims, moved you from place to place so you could keep hunting. So yes, she gets to face consequences too. Glenn stood. But here's where it gets interesting. I've also reached out to some friends, people I've worked with over the years, guards in various federal prisons. And I've made sure they know exactly what you are and exactly what you did. I've made sure that when you arrive at whatever facility you're sent to, the other inmates will know too. Chad's face went white. No, Glenn, please. You'll be in general population. No protective custody, no segregation. Just you and hundreds of men who have daughters, who have sisters, who have very strong opinions about people who hurt children. Glenn leaned close. You'll live in fear every single day, wondering when someone's going to slip a sharpened toothbrush between your ribs in the shower, wondering if your food is poisoned, wondering if you'll wake up. You're a monster, Chad whispered. No, Glenn said softly. I'm a father, and you try to hurt my daughter. This is mercy, Chad, because what I want to do to you, what every instinct I have is screaming at me to do, would end with you in pieces scattered across 6 different counties. This prison, bankruptcy, isolation, fear, this is me being civilized. He pulled out the USB drive Tommy had given him and held it up. Everything is on here. The recording, the video footage, the pattern of your assaults. I'm going to call the FBI now. They'll be here in 20 minutes. You're going to confess. You're going to plead guilty. And you're going to do it knowing that even if you somehow get out in 20 years, I'll still be watching, still waiting. And if you ever go near another child, I will forget about being civilized. Do you understand? Chad nodded, broken, defeated. Glenn made the call. The FBI arrived in 18 minutes. 2 agents in dark suits who'd been briefed by Carmen. They took custody of Chad, read him his rights, and transported him to a field office for processing. Glenn gave them the USB drive, walked them through the evidence, provided contact information for the families who'd agreed to testify. By noon, Chad Eaton was in federal custody, facing charges that would keep him locked away for decades. Glenn stood in his driveway and watched the FBI vehicles disappear around the corner. Marshall appeared beside him, having circled back without being asked. "It's done," Marshall asked. "It's done. How do you feel?" Glenn thought about it. He didn't feel victorious, didn't feel satisfied. What he felt was hollow, exhausted, like he'd run a marathon and crossed the finish line only to find nothing there. "I feel like I failed," he said finally. "I should have seen it sooner. Should have been here instead of 4,000 miles away chasing war criminals while my daughter—" "Stop." Marshall's voice was firm. "You gave your daughter a way to call for help. You responded the instant you knew. You were here as fast as humanly possible. You did everything right. It doesn't feel like it. It never does. But that little girl is safe now. Because of you. Because you taught her to fight back. Because you gave her tools to protect herself. Because you built a life where she knew she could trust you." Marshall paused. "That's not failure, Glenn. That's what being a good father looks like." Glenn wanted to believe that. Wasn't sure he could, but he nodded anyway. His phone buzzed. A text from Heather. "Can we come home?" He typed back, "Yes. It's safe now." 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled into the driveway. Heather got out first, looking fragile and uncertain. Then Leslie, who ran to Glenn and wrapped her arms around him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "You were so far away, but you came back." "Always," Glenn said, holding his daughter close, feeling her heartbeat against his. "No matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing. You call and I come. Every time. No exceptions." Leslie pulled back enough to look up at him with those gray eyes that matched his own. "Is he gone? Is he really gone?" "He's gone. And he's never coming back." "Good." She buried her face in his chest again. "I was scared, but I remembered what Tommy taught me. And I fought. I'm so proud of you," Glenn said, and meant it with everything in him. "You were brave and smart and strong. You're stronger than you know." Heather approached slowly, her eyes red from crying. "Glenn, I'm so sorry. I should have listened when you were worried about him. I should have trusted your instincts." "Don't," Glenn said gently. "This isn't your fault. Chad fooled a lot of people for a long time. He was good at it. I just kept thinking he'd changed. That family was supposed to mean something." "It does," Glenn interrupted. "That's why he's going to prison. That's why I made sure he'll never be free again. Because family protects family. And my family is you and Leslie. Not him. Never him." Heather nodded, tears streaming down her face. Leslie reached out and took her mother's hand, and the 3 of them stood there in the driveway, holding each other, damaged but intact. Marshall cleared his throat from where he'd been standing by his car. "I'm going to head out. But if you need anything—" "Thank you," Glenn said. "For everything." Marshall nodded and drove away. Glenn led his family inside, into the house that would need to be cleaned of Chad's presence, scrubbed of the memory of what had almost happened. But that would come later. For now, they sat together in the living room, and Glenn let Leslie tell him everything in her own words, in her own time. And when she was done, when she'd said everything she needed to say, Glenn made her a promise. "I'm taking leave. 2 months, maybe 3. I'm going to be here every day until you feel safe again. And then I'm requesting a transfer. No more overseas assignments. No more being 4,000 miles away. From now on, I work from Virginia, and I come home every night." Leslie looked at him with something like wonder. "You do that? Give up your job?" "I'm not giving it up, just changing it. And yes, I do that. I do anything for you." He pulled her close. "You're my daughter. You're the most important thing in my life. Everything else is just noise. Heather was crying again, but these were different tears. Relief, gratitude, love. She leaned against Glenn's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, holding both his wife and his daughter, anchoring them in the certainty that he would always protect them. Outside, the sun was shining. Birds were singing. The world continued its indifferent turning. But inside the Fraser house, something had shifted. Something had been broken and was now slowly, carefully being repaired. And Glenn Fraser, who had spent 22 years learning how to unmake men, was learning something new, how to put his family back together. It would take time. It would take patience. It would take everything he had. But he'd done harder things. And this was worth it. This was everything. 6 weeks later, Glenn sat in a small office at CIA headquarters in Langley, across the desk from Carmen Russell. She'd aged since he first met her, lines deepening around her eyes. But her gaze was still sharp, still assessing. "Your transfer request came through," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Domestic operations only. Based in Virginia. You'll be heading up a new unit focused on human trafficking and child exploitation. It's less glamorous than chasing arms dealers, but—" "It's perfect," Glenn interrupted. Carmen smiled slightly. "I thought you'd say that. You start in 2 weeks. She paused. "How's Leslie doing?" "Better. She's seeing a therapist. Good one, former FBI, specializes in trauma. And she's back at soccer practice, which the therapist says is a good sign." Glenn hesitated. "She still has nightmares sometimes. Still locks her door at night. But she's fighting through it. She gets that from you. Maybe. Or maybe she's just stronger than either of us." Glenn looked at the folder. "What happened with Chad?" "Last I heard, he was in federal holding. Pleaded guilty to all charges. Got 35 years without parole. He's been transferred to a medium security facility in Pennsylvania." Carmen's expression was carefully neutral. "I understand there was an incident his first week. Someone put him in the infirmary. Broken ribs, collapsed lung. He's in protective custody now." Glenn absorbed this information without expression. He made calls, activated networks, ensured that Chad's reception in prison would be memorable. And the lawsuits. 6 families filed civil suits. His mother tried to set up a defense fund, but somehow that information got leaked to her retirement community's newsletter. She's been quietly shunned. No money changed hands. Carmen leaned back in her chair. "You're thorough. I'll give you that. I had good teachers." "Yes, you did." She studied him. "The question is, do you regret it? Any of it?" Glenn thought about Leslie, who'd hugged him that morning before school and told him she loved him. Thought about Heather, who'd started smiling again, tentatively but genuinely. Thought about the family he'd nearly lost and had fought to keep. "No," he said, "I don't regret it. I'd do it all again. Even the parts that cross lines. Especially those parts, because those are the parts that mattered." Carmen nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I would have done the same thing. Hell, I've done worse for less." She stood, extending her hand. "Welcome to your new assignment. Try not to make too many people disappear." Glenn shook her hand. "I'll do my best." He left Langley and drove home through spring traffic, past the familiar landmarks of his life. The grocery store where he and Heather shopped. The park where he'd taught Leslie to ride a bike. The school where she learned and grew and built a future. When he pulled into his driveway, Leslie was waiting on the porch, soccer ball at her feet. She'd been practicing, he could tell. Her form was better, her confidence returning. "Hey kiddo," he called. "Want to run some drills?" "Only if you promise not to go easy on me," she shot back, grinning. Glenn grinned back. "Deal." They spent the next hour in the backyard, him playing goalkeeper while she practiced shots, both of them laughing and trash-talking in the way they used to, before everything changed. And maybe things would never be exactly like they were before. Maybe there would always be shadows, always be moments of fear and doubt. But they were here. They were together. They were fighting through it. And that, Glenn decided, was enough. Later that evening, after dinner, after Leslie had gone upstairs to do homework, Heather sat beside Glenn on the couch and took his hand. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us, about what happened, and about what you did." Glenn tensed, waiting. "I know you did things that were probably illegal," Heather continued. "I know you used your connections, your skills, everything you've learned in 22 years of Black Ops work. And I know I'm probably not supposed to be okay with that. But, Glenn prompted, but he hurt our daughter, and you made sure he could never hurt anyone else's daughter. So yes, I'm okay with it. I'm more than okay with it. She squeezed his hand. You protected our family. That's all that matters. Glenn pulled her close, holding her in the gathering darkness of their living room. I'm sorry I wasn't here when it happened. You were here the moment you could be. That's what counts. Heather looked up at him. And now you're staying. You're giving up assignments, changing your career, all of it. For us. For us, Glenn agreed. Because there's nothing more important. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Leslie's music playing faintly from upstairs, the normal sounds of a normal house on a normal evening. But Glenn knew the truth. There was no such thing as normal. There was only the constant work of protecting the people you loved, of standing between them and a world that could be cruel and random and vicious. He'd spent 22 years learning how to fight that world, how to make it bend to his will through force and skill and ruthless efficiency. Now he was using those same skills for something better, something that mattered more than any mission or operation ever could. He was protecting his family, and he would never, ever stop. Because Glenn Frazier had made people disappear for a living. But the one person he'd made disappear most completely was Chad Eaton. And that was justice. 5 years later, Leslie Frazier stood in her high school gymnasium, watching her teammates celebrate their state championship victory. She was 17 now, taller, stronger, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. The trauma of what had happened when she was 12 had faded. Not disappeared, never disappeared, but faded into something manageable, something that made her cautious, but not broken. She'd spent the years since working with a therapist, learning self-defense from Uncle Tommy, who wasn't really an uncle, but might as well have been, and channeling her anger into productive things like soccer and advocacy work for assault survivors. Her father stood in the bleachers, cheering louder than anyone else, Marshall beside him. Glenn had kept his promise. He'd transferred to domestic operations, had worked on cases that dismantled trafficking rings and put predators behind bars. He came home every night. He was there for every game, every school event, every milestone. And Leslie knew, in a way that most 17-year-olds didn't, exactly what her father had done to protect her. She'd asked him about it when she turned 16, demanded the truth, and he'd given it to her without flinching. He'd told her about the phone calls, the networks, the way he'd ensured Chad's life in prison would be miserable and brief. Chad had died 3 years into his sentence, killed in a prison yard altercation that was ruled self-defense by the inmate who'd stabbed him 17 times. Glenn hadn't arranged it, hadn't needed to. He'd just made sure Chad's crimes were well known, and prison had taken care of the rest. Most daughters would have been horrified. Leslie had simply nodded and said, "Good," because she'd learned something from her father, that some people deserved mercy and some people didn't, and knowing the difference was what made you strong. She'd also learned that having someone who would cross any line, break any rule, burn the world down to keep you safe, that was worth more than anything. As the celebration continued around her, Leslie caught her father's eye across the gymnasium. Glenn smiled, proud and fierce, and Leslie smiled back. She was going to college in the fall, majoring in criminal justice, following in her father's footsteps in her own way. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Chad Eaton was learning what it meant to be on the receiving end of justice delivered by a man who never forgot and never forgave. Leslie thought that was exactly right. Some people called it revenge. She called it protection, and she was okay with that.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.